Mr. Becerra, are you familiar with an Israeli study that had 2.5 million patients and found that the vaccinated group was actually 7 times more likely to get infected with COVID than the people who had gotten COVID naturally?
Senator, I'd have to get back to you on that one. I'm not familiar with that study.
Well, you think you might want to be if you're going to travel the country insulting the millions of Americans, including NBA star Jonathan Isaac, who have had COVID, recovered, look at a study with 2.5 million people and say, well, you know what? It looks like my immunity is as good as a vaccine or not. And in a free country, maybe I ought to be able to make that decision. Instead, you've chosen to travel the country calling people like Jonathan Isaac and others, myself included, flat earthers. We find that very insulting, goes against the science. Are you a doctor or a medical doctor?
I've worked over 30 years on health policy.
You're not a medical doctor. Do you have a science degree? And yet you travel the country calling people flat earthers who have had COVID, looked at studies of millions of people, and made their own personal decision that their immunity they naturally acquired is sufficient. But you presume somehow to tell over 100 million Americans who have survived COVID that we have no right to determine our own medical care.
Okay. There is non-board certified ophthalmologist Rand Paul.
Come on.
Complaining that someone, talking about public health when he is a non-board certified ophthalmologist.
What does that mean? Because he's not currently practicing? Is that why he's non-board certified?
Yeah, well, there's debate about that. Some of that is that he doesn't believe that the state can regulate blah, blah, blah.
Oh, it's a libertarian position.
It's a libertarian kind of position that he's had. But, of course, board certification is important for your doctor.
But wait,
I would get a board certified doctor.
Didn't Rand Paul work on COVID patients, though? Like at the beginning of the pandemic, he was in there in the front lines, I thought.
I mean, was he working on their eyes? Because he's an ophthalmologist. He's not an infectious diseases doctor, an epidemiologist.
Okay.
He's none of those things.
Help me out here. I thought that the way it works with medical doctors is like there's sort of the basic medical doctor. That's where you start. And then there are specialists. That's like where you take more education on top of your being an MD. And then you for his case, he's focusing on eyes, which are pretty advanced form of science to have to work on.
Sure. No, there's nothing wrong with ophthalmologists. We all need, my eyesight is, decreasing. Ophthalmologists are good, but I'm not going, are you going to go to a podiatrist to get your, to have heart surgery?
No,
you're going to go to a person who specializes in that particular area. So It just seemed to me that he was sitting there saying, Xavier Becerra, you're not a physician. And it's like, but this isn't your area either. Now, again, I think he had a point about natural immunity. When I looked it up with the Cleveland Clinic, basically they're saying, yes, COVID reinfection is possible, but it's rare. And you do get some level of immunity if you've had COVID. The strongest protection, and you will definitely feel good about this. The strongest protection is if you have had COVID and you are vaccinated. Those two things together, you're sitting pretty.
Right.
You're better off than the people who are just vaccinated, even if they're fully vaccinated, and you're better off than the people who are just depending upon natural immunity, which again, go ahead.
Here's what the Israeli study shows, and we've talked about it before, but that's what Rand Paul cited here, is that, if you are vaccinated and have already had COVID, that's the highest. That's you're the most protected. Then there's people who've had COVID. They're the second highest. And then there's the people who are fully vaccinated. They're the third highest in terms of being able to stop infection. And so what Rand Paul's asking for, it seems like a pretty simple thing, which is can people within the government health establishment please acknowledge the role that natural immunity is playing and factor it into your recommendations, because the government's recommendations form the basis of the mandates that we're seeing across the country. So if the CDC says, this is what we recommend, then a city or a state is going to say, okay, well, this is our mandate. Or a private business will say, okay, this is our mandate. We're basing it off of the CDC guidance. So when the HHS secretary is sitting in front of him, CDC falling under HHS, it makes sense that he would raise this. And here's the thing that he was pushing back against Becerra on in particular. You heard him reference that Becerra said that vaccine hesitant people are flat earthers. He said this in an interview, not an interview, but it was a video forum that he did over Zoom in Kentucky. He was doing it with health officials in Kentucky. So of course, Rand Paul would be much more keenly aware of this. I wasn't aware of it until Rand Paul raised it. I looked it up, and sure enough, it was an event in Kentucky that this took place in. And so Becerra calling people flat earthers, I don't think that's in any way helpful. I really don't. The whole, like, knocking the population for not subscribing to what you're recommending to them. I don't think that's how you make measurable gains in a public health crisis.